Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Near Memo with David, Mike, and Greg, where we talk about local search, Google, and everything in between. And today we're going to be talking about service area businesses and rankings and some of the changes that have happened there. And then David and I will be talking, well, and Mike too, but we're sort of mashing up our items tied to AI overviews and some of the discussion and activity that's going on there. Sundar Pichai's interview, a new study that suggests AI overviews may not be the traffic apocalypse that people are fearing, but we don't know yet. And some other interesting issues like AI overview pages. So let's get into it. Mike, why don't you lead us off with service area businesses?
Sure. So Darren Shaw from Whitespark on Twitter showed some examples of a service area modification where they identified the centroid of their service area. The client refined their service area and then started ranking better under that refinement. Historically, service area has not influenced rank, and this is an example of it influencing rank. So the client ended up having to change what he had to a new, sort of more tighter, smaller service area to get some benefit. And in local Falcon, they saw some improvement in the area where he really wanted to focus. So if that's true, service area that is defined in service, businesses that don't show their address might be, still to be fleshed out fully, might be now dictating where you rank and how well you rank. Service area history at Google is very fraught and interesting, sort of emblematic of their struggle in the small business marketplace. It was introduced as a response to all the location spam by the service area businesses, locksmiths in 2008, 9, 10, 11, because the postcard system was so easy to spam. So they introduced service area businesses where a business could hide their address. And then that became very easy to spam. And it has propagated spam everywhere. And then the service areas were never used to calculate where this business should rank. It was always ranked around where the pin was, but that led to privacy issues with women's shelters and those sorts of things that didn't want to show their address. So ultimately, they've talked about possibly using service area as as the identified service area as where the business might rank for a long time, but they've never done anything about it. So this could be the first move in that direction. It's like the issue with service area is fascinating because these things don't really fit on a map very well. There's no address, and so there's no physical relationship to a map. And so there's this internal conflict that has always existed at Google between the maps team and the business listing groups, the GBP. And of course, as we see typically with Google, the side that wanted to use business listings as a lead gen won out, and this is a very rich advertising pool. Ultimately led to the development of LSAs to try to control the spam, but then they didn't put enough controls there. So that led to a bunch of spam. Now in the forums these days, when you're in the forums, literally 3 out of every 4 posts are my business has been suspended and I can't get it back. And so clearly they're ramping up that whole side of trying to clean up the listings. And it is sort of past time that the actual service area defined should be used as a definition of where that business should show. It probably still won't show as well as businesses with addresses, and my recommendation is if you want to experiment with it in a constrained area. It is likely that you will do better in a constrained area than a very broad area. And spam your other addresses if you want to do well in the next town over or whatever. Whoop, did I just say that? I did. It's an interesting development, and business people in the service area business should track it closely. I know Darren is testing it. You might consider following him on Twitter or signing up for his newsletter, which I like a lot.
They've been talking about a version of this for maybe 15 years. you know? I
Yes.
mean, services is a huge part of the small business market, enormous part of the small business market. And, you could argue that the spamming, I mean, I can remember being at search conferences years and years and years ago and listening to people talk about how the workarounds to get shown in service areas that are different from where your physical, where your
In
storefront is
fact,
or
a
where your
Google
physical.
representative in 2009 at some meeting suggested that you should use PO boxes and
Right.
virtual
Or
stores to expand your footprint. I mean,
or these these WeWork like office spaces, which led to a whole kind of convoluted response to that. I mean, these are all sort of rational responses to Google's failure to offer a real solution to the problem of how do I show up in the areas where I serve, but are different from where I'm based or different from my home location. And if you go ahead.
well, and organic and local service ads were the responses to that. Organic is still a possibility, and local service ads, though, got the bejesus spammed out of it, right? Because again, they implemented it without enough guardrails, and um, and one of the reasons it's so easy in the service business is these service businesses are relatively low capital to get into, and there's a lot of criminality top to bottom in them as well. So it's very tempting target because it's easy to do bait and switch. Somebody comes over to your house and says,
Well,
"Oh, the
that's the
windows are going to be
LSA problem.
$20,000," and all of a sudden they're
Right.
$60,000.
That's the LSA fraud problem that you wrote about.
Yes, right.
Well, and
So
they just took. Go ahead, David.
I was going to say, you guys have been talking about this sort of from the Google business owner side of things, right? Like that sort of intersection. And I'll flip it around and like, let's talk about it from the Google consumer side of things. Mike, you sort of hinted at this, but like as a consumer, what do I care? Why do I see a map at all for a service area related search? All I care about is that I'm actually in the service area of the business. Just show me the businesses who will come to my house, right? I don't care if they're 60 miles away. If I set an appointment for Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. and they show up, I'm perfectly happy. So,
Right.
so it seems to me just like just another indication of very lazy product management on Google's part when it comes to the consumer interface for local searches. Not to say
Right.
that ChatGPT is any better. We've seen plenty of examples this week of how bad ChatGPT is at answering very simple local search queries. But Mike, to your point, this should be a big dollar value category to Google's ad machine, and the fact that they've put so little investment into the consumer experience here is just kind of shocking. After, I mean, these things have been around. What did you say, 2009? Right, we're at 15 years now, and they still don't have
At
like
least, at least.
a decent consumer interface for identifying local service providers who will come to your house. So it's kind of
Yeah, and
again, they're just comfortable and they're not being challenged by anyone. In this case, including even the newer entrants in the sort of quasi generative
right.
search engine space. So.
And this problem is even greater in the rural area, right? Because businesses are structured to travel 60 miles. That's how they make a living, because otherwise they don't get 250,000 people in their market area. And you would have thought that AI, when it was integrated with maps, would have solved this problem. Show me all the people who are willing to come to my house with, I don't care where they
It's
are, or all the people within a 60-mile radius, whatever the numbers. But it failed miserably at that when it was integrated. So it's like they were experimenting with AI in that, which theoretically could solve this problem without the need for specially hiding their addresses, or or showing their addresses or whatever, right? So you're right, they have not put the effort into it, but that's consistent with Google. And it just reminds me, they're very good at these little small projects at the bottom, or that ultimately percolate up and become a big project. They're not good at small projects at the bottom that don't grab the attention of up higher ups, and they're not good at big projects coming down, right? Like Google Plus or AI. So there's these failures in their organizational structure that I think prevent them from doing these things correctly.
all they would need to do with AI is solicit the service areas from the business and then use that, just pick up on that and show those businesses based on
Yeah.
self-reported service areas.
And then
And
perhaps showing the ones that are closer a little more in the ranking, right?
Well, right. I
agree.
mean, that could just be one ranking factor among many. But one of the things that's relevant to this is the removal of proximity as a ranking factor for LSAs, right? We talked about that a little bit before, and there was discussion on LinkedIn from Darren about how this is a great development. And then Matt McGee, an SEO specializing in real estate, came in and said this is a terrible development for small realtors because you're going to have big firms come in and suck up all the all the traffic from those and outbid those smaller firms, and they will just capture, and they are not necessarily competent, they don't know the area, et cetera, et cetera. So it's an example of two things: Google trying to capture more revenue in a kind of cynical way, although it may be relevant in some categories to expand the aperture, so to speak, and then their sort of bias in favor of larger entities, de facto or by as a policy thing, right? I mean,
Right.
it winds up
Well,
being, maybe it's not intentional, but it winds up doing that by default. Go ahead.
but again, I think this is the real estate example is a really good one. I mean, I generally agree with Matt. Like, yeah, I'd want a realtor who's really specialized in the two neighborhoods I'm looking at, right? And in that case, guess what? Actually, the neighborhoods that the realtor is in probably do matter a lot more for my search, unlike a plumber or a roofer or a landscaper or whatever, where it's like, no, I just need them to show up, right? So to me, and I think Google is a really smart company. They've got all of this sort of intent matching, signals happening in all of their various algorithms. Like, okay, intent deserves location, or intent is sort of location agnostic, and you just choose real estate as a category where intent should be very much location driven.
And historical data should prove that. I mean, they should have evidence of. I mean, this is how they were sort of disambiguating certain kinds of local queries when there wasn't a geo modifier on there. Is that certain kinds of queries and categories tend to be more locally oriented, and so they should have tons and tons, 20 years of data on that kind of thing.
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.